In 1828, if you walked through the graveyards of Edinburgh under the cover of night, you might notice something terrifying big over the freshest graves. Massive iron cages bolted deep into the earth. They were not built to keep monsters in. They were built to keep human beings out. This was the golden age of modern medicine. Surgery was advancing at a breakneck speed. But doctors, they faced a major problem. To learn human anatomy, they needed human bodies. And the law only granted them a handful of executed criminals a year. To fill the supply gap, a black market emerged. Resurrection men. They dug up fresh graves for cash. But digging up graves in the dark was cold, exhausting, and dangerous. Eventually, two men in Scotland looked at each other and realized something far simpler. Why dig up the dead when you can just make fresh ones yourself? Welcome to 1820s Edinburgh, the medical capitals of the world. At the center of this academic empire was Dr. Robert Knox, a brilliant, charismatic anatomist who ran the most popular medical school in the city. Hundreds of eager young students packed his lecture halls daily, paying top dollar to watch him dissect human cadavers with incredible precision. Dr. Knox had a ruthless standard. He demanded fresh, pristine bodies, not rotting corpses that had been underground for weeks. Fresh tissue showed muscles, nerves, and organs as they truly were. And he didn't care where his supply came from. No questions asked, as long as the specimen was clean. Enter William Burke and William Hare. Neither man was a cold-blooded killer by trade. They were poor Irish immigrants living in a squalid boarding house run by Hare's wife in the slums of Edinburgh. They were just trying to survive in a city that looked down on them. Until late 1827, when an old army pensioner living in Hare's lodging house died of natural causes. While still owing Hare £4 in back rent to cover the dead man's debt, Hare and his friend Burke decided to sell the corpse to an anatomy school. They filled the coffin with bark to trick the gravediggers, loaded the body into a sack, and marched through the dark streets to the steps of the university. A student directed them to the private lecture room of Dr. Robert Knox. When Knox's assistants opened the sack, they were thrilled. The body was pristine. Knox handed Burke and Hare £7 and 10 shillings, a massive sum equivalent to months of hard manual labor. As the two men walked back out into the freezing night with a heavy bag of coins, a terrifying realization washed over them. Digging up graves was bloody physical labor, full of risk from cemetery guards, but finding someone who wouldn't be best, that was easy. In the overcrowded slums of Edinburgh, hundreds of desperate, homeless, and vulnerable people wandered the streets. Every night, people with no family, no records, and no one to search for them. All Burke and Hare needed was a recipe to kill someone without leaving a single mark on the body, because a body covered in bruises or wounds would raise suspicion at the lab. They perfected their method, a process so distinct that it eventually entered the English dictionary. Burking. It began with hospitality. Burke or Hare would invite a lonely, vulnerable stranger into their lodging house. An elderly beggar, a young woman, or an itinerant traveler. They would offer them warm food, a cozy fire, and endless cups of cheap whiskey. Once the victim was heavily intoxicated and slipping into unconsciousness, the trap struck. Hare would jump onto the victim's chest, using his full body weight to pin their arms and flatten their lungs. Burke would then slide his hand over the victim's nose and mouth, clamping their jaw shut. The victim would struggle, but with compressed lungs and no airway, they suffocated silently within minutes. It was horrific, efficient, and virtually invisible. There were no broken bones, no strangulation marks on the throat, and no blood. To an inspecting doctor, it looked like the person had simply died in their sleep from disease or alcohol poisoning. Over the next 10 months, Burke and Hare went on a quiet, methodical killing spree. They murdered 16 people. They killed an elderly woman, a young woman named Mary Patterson, and even a beloved local street vendor known as Daft Jamie. When students recognized Jamie on Dr. Knox's dissection table, Knox denied it was him and hastily shaved the face and dissected the body before questions could be asked. Hines was hungry, and Dr. Knox kept paying. Greed made them careless. On Halloween night in 1828, they brought a poor Irish woman named Margaret Doherty into the house. Two other lodgers, James and Anne Gray, became suspicious of Burke's erratic behavior and the fact that he wouldn't let anyone nail a heap of straw in the corner of the room. The next morning, when Burke and Hare left the house, the Grays searched the straw. Underneath the blood-stained bedding, they found Margaret's cold, lifeless body. The police were called, but they faced a massive legal roadblock. Because Burke left no physical marks, the medical examiners couldn't legally prove Margaret had been murdered. Desperate for a conviction, the prosecutor offered William Hare a deal straight from the devil: immunity from prosecution if he turned King's evidence and confessed, laying the entire blame on William Burke. Hare didn't hesitate. He sold out his partner to save his own neck. On January 28, 1829, William Burke was walked to the gallows in front of a crowd of over 25,000 furious onlookers. As the trapdoor dropped, the mob cheered, but the story didn't end with his death. In a stroke of poetic, brutal justice, the judge ordered that William Burke's body be sent directly to the University of Edinburgh to be publicly dissected by the very professors he had supplied. Thousands of people lined up to view his dissected remains. His skeleton was preserved, and to this day, it hangs in the University of Edinburgh Anatomy Museum. His skin was tanned and used to bind a pocket notebook that still exists today. Dr. Robert Knox was never legally charged, though his reputation was ruined and he was driven out of Edinburgh by angry mobs. William Hare vanished into obscurity, escaping into the night under a false name. The horrors of Burke and Hare forced Parliament to pass the Anatomy Act of 1832. It expanded the legal supply of bodies for medical research, ending the era of the resurrection men forever. Burke and Hare set out to make a fortune off the dead. In the end, they proved just how far human beings will go when science, greed, and desperation collide in the dark.